Hello again and welcome to Spotlight, the interview show on RT. I'm Al Grinova and today my guest is Mihhail Slipенчука. The world's biggest container of freshwater Lake Baikal is under threat. The first danger comes from the cellulose factory polluting the pure water with lethal dioxins. The second comes from energy companies who seem to be ready to harm the ecosystem of the lake for the sake of producing several more kilowatts. Last year, Moscow adopted a special program to protect the lake. But what has been done, and is it enough? Here's the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Lake Baikal Protection Fund, Mihhail Слипенчука.
The world's deepest lake can still boast water rich in oxygen, but it may come to an end at any moment. The cellulose factory is spitting out wastewater full of deadly chemicals straight into the lake, undermining its unique ecology. The Russian government has set a goal to help Lake Baikal become clean again, but money is short. Here's where private investments could help. One of Russia's richest men cares about Baikal and is ready to pump in cash to aid development and the environment.
Hello, Mr. Slipенchuk. Thank you for being with us today. We're going to discuss a very important matter which relates not only to Russians, but the entire world as well. Lake Baikal is something every person on the earth admires. It's in the same category as the pyramids in Egypt or the Eiffel Tower. Why did you decide to protect Lake Baikal? You're from Siberia, but your hometown is very far from the lake, so why does it attract you so much?
Hello. The question is very much to the point. I'm glad that you're familiar with the subject. Indeed, the Altai is quite far from Lake Baikal. The Altai is in western Siberia, whereas Lake Baikal is in eastern Siberia. The reason actually goes back to my childhood when I decided to be a traveler. For this purpose, I studied geography at Moscow University.
So this is actually what you majored in?
I hold a degree in geography. I always wanted to be an oceanographer. I know practically everything there is to know about Jacques Cousteau and all Russian oceanographers. But somehow I never became an oceanographer and specialized in environmental protection instead. And then in the late 1990s, as you know, Russia was going through a difficult time. So I saw this movie, Wall Street, and became a financier. Today, I'm a doctor of economics. So, when I finally managed to put together these two things, my desire to explore the world and my ability to finance this work, I came up with this idea to use mere submersibles to explore Lake Baikal. It serves several purposes. It has scientific value, and at the same time, it helps raise awareness of the huge problems Baikal residents are facing. Lake Baikal has a special status, and there are 15 different agencies in charge of Lake Baikal. They don't have one authority they would all submit to, apart from the president, of course. That's why Lake Baikal requires special attention.
You mentioned this dive to the bottom of Lake Baikal. It was a unique project and was actually worth putting in the Guinness Book of Records. By the way, have they actually put this in the Book of Records?
Yes, they have put it in the Russian Book of Records.
Well, that's good, but it's worth the Guinness Book too. Other than being a record just for the fact of it, did the Baikal dive have any practical scientific value?
We have 4 institutes working on this project, and each had its own research program. In the course of 3 years, 175 dives took place in most various points of Lake Baikal.
175?
Yes, 175. Of course, in the 1990s, exploration was conducted with Pisces submersibles, and the number of dives was much lower. Today, NIR is the best researched deep submersion vehicles. They are equipped with state-of-the-art equipment for scientific research, and they can dive to any depth. And they are environmentally friendly, which is also important.
For 3 years, 2 submarines have explored Lake Baikal, and Spotlight's Elena Demidova reports on these unique vessels right now.
The Mir submersibles are quite a rare product of cooperation between the USSR and the West during the Cold War. They were developed in the Soviet Union and built in Finland in 1987. During the 24 years of their existence, they participated in some historic expeditions. In the mid-1990s, the Mir vessels were used by American producer James Cameron to film the wreck of Titanic. In 2007, the submersibles carried out a dangerous mission in the Arctic when they went 4,300 meters under the ice to gather samples of soil and water. Russian scientists on board of one of the vessels planted a symbolic flag on the seabed of the North Pole. The most recent big expedition of the two subs has been to Lake Baikal. For 3 years in a row, Russian scientists have been diving to the bottom of one of the oldest and certainly the largest and deepest freshwater bodies in the world. The many subs searched for new fish and plants and examined the level of pollution of Baikal's waters.
What does the bottom of Lake Baikal look like? Nobody had actually seen it prior to your expedition. Did you make any breathtaking discoveries there?
There were many discoveries, and I believe more will be made later, as we still haven't processed all the data we've collected. To give you just one example, during the first dive, the echo sounder device showed the bottom at the depth of 400 meters, while we expected it at 1,634 meters. I was puzzled, but it turned out that there was a thick layer of plankton reflecting the signal at 400 meters. Then, the same things happened again at the depth of 1,000 meters. So Lake Baikal has
It has layers like a pie.
It has a natural filter that keeps it clean.
Are those layers formed because of different temperatures?
Possibly. We don't know that yet. All we know is that there are thick layers of plankton.
And then fish feed on the plankton and so on, and the cycle goes on.
You know, Lake Tanganyika in Africa has the same geologic structure, but fish live only in the upper layer of 200 meters, because below that level there's just too much hydrogen sulfide. Lake Baikal is a unique ecosystem because its water has enough oxygen even at the bottom.
We just saw that. These pictures show the bottom of Lake Baikal and there's fish at the bottom.
Indeed there is. In fact, there are some endemic fish like golomyanka who start their day at the surface, then go to the bottom and return to the surface in the evening, eating different things along the way.
But how can it handle such pressure difference?
Somehow it can do that.
It should explode.
This fish is unique because it's 90% fat. In the past, people used to dry it and make candles of it. So there is fish at all depths, and this is because in the fall, when the surface cools down, the upper layer becomes heavier than deeper layers, and the layers mix. There were other discoveries as well. For example, we have discovered a large number of living organisms that hadn't been known so far. They will probably mean nothing to you and myself, but they're still discoveries. For instance, crustaceans that crawl the bottom, so nobody had been able to collect them in the past, and a species of sponge that we'd been unaware of. I'd say the most outstanding discovery were gas hydrates and oil seeps at the bottom of Lake Baikal. Also, it was interesting to explore the geological history of the bottom structure. We used to think that Lake Baikal had always been that way, but it's not true. There used to be 3 separate lakes there.
Your expeditions attract a lot of media attention, including television, and at least part of that is because many VIPs are involved in this work. The President of Mongolia, Prime Minister Putin, James Cameron. To them, it was mostly an adventure. But did their participation in your project have any practical value for your work?
When the Lake Baikal Protection Fund organized those expeditions, one of the objectives, other than science, was to raise awareness of the problems with the lake among world leaders. So when Prime Minister Putin joined the expedition, he got first-hand experience of Lake Baikal.
So you asked him for money?
I never ask anyone for money. I earn money.
But what about the fund? Didn't he promise to give you $1 billion?
Our objective was different. We wanted him to see how people live at Lake Baikal and to perhaps introduce some changes to the legislation. I know that following his submersion, some funds were allocated for research at Lake Baikal, and I'm very happy about it. Mongolian President Elbek Dorj was the first president ever to dive in Lake Baikal.
Did Putin dive as Prime Minister?
Yes, and he was the first top-level official to do that. Anyway, the Mongolian president said he realized how interconnected we all are. Of course, we are divided by national and administrative borders, but say the Selenga, which is the largest river that flows into Lake Baikal, has its source in Mongolia. Therefore, the way Mongolia handles the Selenga affects Lake Baikal.
I have a good idea. You dive with the Prime Minister, say to the depth of 1,000 meters. After a while he asks, when are we going back to the surface? Do we have enough oxygen? And you ask him, will you give us the money?
Yeah, people ask us about that. We tell them the dive is free. It's going back to the surface that you have to pay for.
Says Mihhail Slipенchuk, the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Lake Baikal Protection Fund. Spotlight will be back shortly after a break, so we'll continue this interview in less than a minute. Don't go.
It used to be an ideal place for a holiday, but it all changed in a moment. Though the wounds of war are still visible, the Republic is not only relieved, but also shaping the future.
This history still keeps its secrets, but now it's time to reveal the hidden. The Soviet Files on RT.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm Algrinov, and just a reminder that my guest in the studio today is Mihhail Slipенchuk, the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Lake Baikal Protection Fund.
Mr. Slipенчук, we just now saw Mr. Cameron, the film director, on the screen. He took part in your expeditions, and as far as I know, you have become quite close with him. He suggested using mere submersibles and other Russian technologies to help with the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, but for some reason that didn't work out. Do you know why? What happened?
MERS are indeed the best and the most reliable submersibles. They have 4 levels of protection. The only problem is, you need a carrier ship for them. Other than that, it would be easy, because they can be quickly delivered anywhere in the world, in Ruslan plains.
I see, so you also need a mothership.
Yes, you need a mothership. So that's one reason. But actually, even that is not a problem. I think the main reason why the idea was rejected is because of some commercial considerations and arrogance. Probably British Petroleum was reluctant to use Russian technologies. Anyway, thank God they managed to deal with the problem. But this is a big lesson for the future. We must be aware that commercial considerations may have a very negative effect on our life.
That's true. You just said they are very safe, and I think they are safe if you invite presidents and prime ministers for pleasure rides. There must be no danger involved, otherwise they would have never allowed you to do that.
They are very safe, except that when we dived at the North Pole, I think the guys who dived there were real heroes, because getting back to the surface through an ice hole measuring 20 by 20 meters from the depth of 4,200 meters is technically a very difficult thing to do, but they did it.
Why is it so difficult? You have powerful computers, GPS and all that. What's the problem?
Let me explain. Radio waves can't propagate underwater. All you have is sound waves, hydroacoustics, and those have the reach of 1.5 kilometers at the most. Of course, we had a team that traveled by helicopter, drilled the ice and installed transponders to help the guys down there find the ice hole. But still, those 3 kilometers at the bottom, when they were diving, they were without a radio link.
You mean they could be carried away?
That's right. They could have been carried away by the current.
And then it would have been very difficult to find them.
As Anatoly Sagalevich, the man who had designed Mir, said, it is unlikely that somebody will be able to repeat that before the Arctic ice melts away.
Did you find any artifacts at the bottom?
You mean in Lake Baikal?
In Lake Baikal or at the North Pole?
Unfortunately, I didn't get to dive at the North Pole, even though I took part in the expedition. But in Lake Baikal, we devoted 2 dives to looking for artifacts. And we did see something. We saw railway cars dating back to the time of Nicholas II.
At the bottom?
600 meters below the surface, but we weren't able to lift anything to the surface.
So you don't have any mementos at home from the bottom, do you? There should be something.
You know, when Andrei Makarevich did his dive, he found a fishing lure, so he's got a souvenir. I only saw a cattle, but it wasn't something I wanted to take.
A cattle from the bottom of Lake Baikal is as good as a bell from the Titanic. You know, they say that the biggest threat to Lake Baikal comes from that paper mill. Back in the 60s, Sergei Gerasimov made a film about it.
Yes, by the lake.
Yes. So, the struggle started a very long time ago, back in the Soviet period, and it's not clear who's right and who's wrong. On the one hand, you're a businessman, so you understand what businesses want. On the other hand, you're head of the Baikal Protection Fund. Is it possible to reach a compromise? Say, is it possible to provide other jobs for 1,000 people working at that mill?
Like I said earlier, the lake has an effective self-purifying system, so it will definitely be able to cope with the pollution that comes from the paper mill. But this doesn't mean that the lake should be used to the benefit of one company. There are a huge number of business opportunities we're not using, such as tourism. And when we see steel pipes or smell lignin within 20 kilometers of the mill, we know that Lake Baikal cannot be clean. So, of course, the mill has to go. The problem is how to provide jobs for the people, because unfortunately, it's hard to find a job in eastern Siberia. It's a matter of government policy. So, I came up with this crazy idea. There is this law on gambling zones. So, how about we turn this paper mill into another, 5th gambling zone? We'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. First, we'll shut down a plant that causes damage to the environment, and second, we will boost tourism.
You call it a crazy idea, but I think that the whole idea of setting up those gambling zones was crazy in the first place. So in this context, your idea is just following the general trend.
Anyway, this way we will be able to shut down the paper mill and attract people.
That's if we manage to make casinos move out of Moscow, which we haven't been able to do so far.
That's not my job.
Anyway, I like your idea.
Why not? It's far from Moscow, far from big cities. I think it's realistic. In addition, I'm sure that the airports of Irkutsk and Ulan-Ude will immediately add new flights to Asian countries, which will be very helpful, because the way it is now, all hubs are in Moscow. To get from Tomsk to Tokyo, you have to go through Moscow. Did you know that?
You've mentioned tourism. How do you attract tourists to Baikal? It's really a very remote place. But, on the other hand, people from Moscow do fly to resorts of the Dominican Republic. It's a 10-hour flight too.
There is a government program for tourist and recreation zones. Currently, a new tourist and recreation zone is being built near Turka. That's the place we used as a base for Mirs. The infrastructure is already there. Next year they will start building hotels, convention centers, etc. So little by little, this problem of attracting tourists to Baikal is being resolved. Now about logistics. Yes, it takes 5.5 hours to fly from Moscow to Lake Baikal.
But it's still closer than Cuba.
Right. Then there will be tourists from Southeast Asia. Japanese companies are already developing a route from Ulan-Ude to Ulaanbaatar with a capacity of 10,000 tourists a year. I'm sure that people from Southeast Asia who have never seen snow will be interested in going there just to see the snow. People from Singapore, Taiwan, etc.
But there are no ski resorts near Baikal, right?
There are two places. There is Mountain Beachia on the eastern shore, and there is a slope near the paper mill. It's functioning. The only problem is, there is this bad smell coming from the paper mill. That's why we need to shut it down.
You say that Lake Baikal can cope with the pollution that comes from the paper mill. But if Lake Baikal really becomes a mecca for tourists, will it be able to cope with all the pollution that comes from tourists? With hotels dumping their waste into the lake?
Well, the Swiss somehow are able to cope with all the tourists coming to Lake Geneva.
You know, I recently was in Geneva, where, by the way, your Mirs are going to dive soon. And I asked them, what do you need submersibles for? Because the water is very clear. And they told me that the water there is clear because of quicksilver. It turned out that Lake Geneva is even more polluted than the Moskva River. There's almost no fish in it.
I'm not sure about it.
That's what they told me.
We'll see when Mirs go there and dive. Anyway, the only kind of tourism that exists in the Baikal area today is camping. People live in tents, burn fires, and, like you said, litter the shore. I'm sure that if we have properly organized tourism with rules and proper oversight, Lake Baikal will be one of the best places in Russia, and all Russian people will want to visit it.
Another problem, another issue, another threat to Baikal are hydropower plants. As far as I know, there are 3 dams that are already built. They say that fish is no longer able to swim up the Angara River.
Up the Angara River.
And into Lake Baikal because of the dams. They say that the water level in Baikal has risen by 1 meter, and that is causing problems too.
As I've told you, when we dived, we discovered 3 levels of Baikal, separated at 600 meters and 800 meters. That means that Baikal has been changing for some time. It's a change of the ecosystem. The biggest problem at the moment is that hatcheries should produce the fry. Fisheries used to be state-owned, but now they're being privatized. No private businessman will ever produce the fry and then release it into the river, unless there is a government order. That's what we should pay attention to. As for the Angara River, I do not think the situation may have more impact than it has now.
There's a government program or a decree or regulation saying the level of Lake Baikal can only change within the range of 1 meter. Is that something that hydropower plants control?
Yes.
And they don't like it, because they can generate more profit with bigger fluctuations. So they're lobbying this issue. Do you do something about that?
I think any changes to Lake Baikal are bad for the ecosystem.
So you're not like other business people. You are one of them, but you're against free enterprise.
The dams were built back in the Soviet times. It's the same kind of situation as with the paper mill. Any change to the ecosystem means that the amount of fish will decrease, and in addition, this causes problems for people living near the lake. So we need to achieve a compromise. We need to regulate the situation.
I don't get it. If the water rises in such a big lake by a meter, or even half a meter, this means thousands of square kilometers get flooded. Does that happen ever?
The water level rises because of those dams, the Bratsk Dam and others. They change it depending on their seasonal needs for power generation. I think they should pay for it. Let them pay. If they want to change the water level in Lake Baikal, they should pay for it. Let him pay.
Thank you very much for being with us, and just a reminder that my guest on the show today was Mikhail Slipенchuk, the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Lake Baikal Protection Fund. And that's it for now from all of us here. Spotlight will be back with more first-hand comments on what's going on in and outside Russia. Until then, stay on RT and take care. Спасибо.